Hey, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson. Before we get to today's show, a quick reminder that this podcast is free for everyone and supported by those who can afford it. So if you have found this podcast a useful companion during 2020 and you'd like to see it continue through 2021, I would invite you to go to plantyourself.com/gift if you are in a position where you have the means to support something that means something to you and hopefully you think is doing good in the world. You can use PayPal or Patreon. You can make a one-time contribution or become an ongoing, sustaining patron of the show. And if funds are too tight for you to show your appreciation in a monetary sense, you can still leave a review of the Plant Yourself podcast on whatever platform you listen to podcasts. That also helps us a great deal. All right, on to today's episode. This is the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm Howard Jacobson of plantyourself.com and the Big Change Program with Josh Lajani. This podcast is part of my mission to empower you to live a healthy and joyful life. This month's goodie is the Sometimes Say Never report. I wrote it after getting a lot of questions from clients and students about how to distinguish between occasional treat foods and foods you will never, ever, ever eat again. So when should you go nuclear and eliminate a food from your diet permanently? And when does it make more sense to include it in a limited, conditional way? If your way of eating doesn't leave you feeling empowered and peaceful all the time, then this report will be a valuable read. And you can get it, as well as a subscription to my e-newsletter, The Big Change Bulldog, by going to plantyourself.com/never. And now to today's show. So if you've been listening for the last couple of weeks, you know that I've been, well, I guess the only word to use is bragging about my 2 buckets of cold water over my head every day and my shirtless runs in 25 degrees Fahrenheit. And today we're going to talk with a guy who is responsible for my really ramping up the cold exposure and an embrace of environmental conditioning. So, you know, in 2013, Colin Campbell and I published the book Whole, which was all about holism as opposed to reductionism. And my life trajectory from that point on has been ever increasing holistic appreciation of what goes into health. Originally, I applied holism to diet alone, and I felt like, well, as long as everyone's eating a healthy diet, that's all we really need. And then after working with Josh, I began to see the importance of exercise, of movement. And I'd known it. Like I wasn't, completely ignorant about it, but really in terms of embracing it in my own lifestyle. And having done a martial art called Sistema, my teacher Glenn Murphy has been, getting on me to deal with my abject terror at cold, and had convinced me since the beginning of June to pour a bucket of cold water over my head every day. But it was only when I read Scott Carney's book, What Doesn't Kill Us: How Freezing Water, Extreme Altitude, and Environmental Conditioning Will Renew Our Lost Evolutionary Strength, did I begin to understand the crucial role that just physical discomfort plays in making us healthy, happy, fulfilled, authentic human beings. So for a long time, it was plants and running. For me now, it's plants and running and cold. You know how some paleo people will point to, like the Inuit who subsist on whale blubber and the Maasai who eat large amounts of meat and drink blood and say, well, they're pretty healthy, therefore we Westerners should adopt the same diet. And it's utterly ridiculous because there are so many factors that go into what produces health. So when we look at the blue zones, we see people who are eating a largely plant-based diet. They're moving a lot. They're in community. And you know what? They're also drinking alcohol. And every study has shown that alcohol is a toxin. It's not good for you. It increases cancer. It increases obesity. It increases all sorts of problems. And yet these blue zone cultures embrace alcohol. So maybe the problem isn't strictly the alcohol in isolation, but it's alcohol within a context in which people are not moving and eating right and supporting each other and engaging in spiritual community. And we can't tease all that apart. And so if we're looking at what does it take for human beings to be healthy, and we look at who we are, what we are designed to be, what we are designed to experience, what we are designed to do, you can't get away from the fact that human beings have evolved in environments that are very, very different from the one in which most Westerners are living now. And so this show shares a perspective on health that I believe is as fundamental as eating plants and moving vigorously. So without further ado, Scott Carney, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Man, it's awesome being here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so I heard about you on I guess it was like Weekend Edition NPR, and I just got so excited for this message to like reach so many people. And so you've got this new book. It's been out for I don't know a couple of weeks. What Doesn't Kill Us. So dude, you're doing great. You're on major national media. Like how's everything going with all this?
Yeah, who knew that a book about being uncomfortable and jumping into ice water would catch fire, if you'll allow me to pun, so well. I mean, but I think that there's a message here that really resonates with people, which is that the environment that you inhabit is important, and that can be a key to staying healthy and as I showed in the book, actually let you do some pretty amazing things.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. I'm really curious though about like when I first heard your interview, and I contacted you and the publisher for to do this interview. I was kind of thinking that I would talk to you about Wim Hof and Laird Hamilton and some of the other folks. But the more I read, the more I got interested in your story, and the more I identified with you.
Mm-hmm.
So like I know your previous book was kind of a mirror image, like a dark mirror image of what this one turned out to be, which was like debunking a sort of a spiritual, physical group that led to someone's death by very irresponsible means. Can you talk a little bit about like that story and how kind of it predisposed you to approach this one?
Right. Well, I don't think this book could have been written without writing my first two books, actually. The first book was about organ trafficking and the really dark side of the medical industry in general, and how people get taken advantage of for the money that their bodies represent. The second book was about, it started with an experience that I had when I was a leader of an abroad program for American college students in India. In my previous life, I was an anthropologist getting my PhD, and I was leading this abroad program. I was the director, and we ended up on a meditation retreat in Bodh Gaya in North India, where it was the spot where the Buddha attained enlightenment about 2,800 years ago, and at the end of this 10-day silent meditation, my best student, the prettiest, the brightest, the most sort of driven of them all, climbed up to the roof of the retreat center and jumped to her death, committing suicide. As the director of the program, I was responsible for bringing her body back home and understanding why this happened. And I read her journal, and some of the last things that she wrote in the journal, the last words were, "I am a bodhisattva," which means essentially I am on my way to enlightenment. I am essentially an angel. And all she had to do was leave her body to gain this sort of power. And, and the book that I wrote that came out of that experience, A Death on Diamond Mountain, was about this allure of spiritual seekers who are looking to be greater than themselves through meditation, and how that can lead them down a very dark path. And I sort of over the years collected journals of people who had died on silent meditation retreats, or gone insane on silent meditation retreats. And I followed the story of one particular guy who died in this in a silent meditation retreat in the mountains of Arizona under the tutelage of this very suspect American Tibetan Lama, sort of a white guy in robes, if you will. And so when I found Wim Hof, who makes very similar claims, right? That he can give you superpowers, whereas Michael Roach was saying he could, you could learn to levitate and walk through walls and, various other sort of very magical powers. Wim Hof was making sort of similar claims. He was saying that he could control his body temperature at will and control his immune system, and he was proving that by dunking himself in ice water and staying there for extraordinarily long amounts of time, or climbing Mount Everest in just a pair of shorts and boots. Doing these things that are, they look like they're crazy. No, let me take that back. They are crazy to do. And when he was saying that he could teach other people to do this, I was sure that he was going to get people killed. So I came out there with the intention of proving to the world that he was just like this other guy I had looked at, and that, you should be wary before you get involved with Wim. But it turns out, because I'm an investigative journalist, I have a certain set of ethics when I go in to do my reporting. I had to give him a chance. And so I did his training, and lo and behold, in the matter of like 7 days, I went from a guy who was living in California, in Los Angeles, palm trees swaying, to his training center, which is in the heart of Poland, in the middle of the winter. This is the winter that stopped Napoleon's army. It's the winter that ground the Nazi army to a halt. Here I am standing outside in the snowy wilderness in just a bathing suit with my feet bare in the snow. And I'm standing outside for like an hour at a time, or I'm sitting on the banks of a river melting the snow around me. And I finished the week by hiking up a mountain, nearby his house, a ski slope. But it's 2 degrees outside, and I'm hiking up this whole mountain for 8 hours, and I'm burning up the whole time. And it was so shocking, and I had such this reversal in my sort of understanding about these claims that some gurus make, that I knew I had to write a book about it.
It's so interesting because, like, we'll get into kind of the message, but you began this conversation by saying basically that we're part of our environment. And, the kind of the message of the book is that if we're always coddled and bubbled and wrapped and protected from it, we don't get to become fully our natural selves. And we suffer. We suffer from a lack of resilience. And, in throughout our history, we didn't really have a choice about it. But now in this little blip of time, we get to, use up all the world's fossil fuels to make ourselves comfortable.
Right.
And it's to our detriment. But you came into this with the perspective of people who are out of the mainstream in this way, sort of doing extreme things, are basically charlatans and fakes, and ultimately destructive forces in people's lives.
Right. And the thing is that even now, I'm still skeptical of many of these claims. I still need evidence for what I get into, and I'm still suspicious of anyone who says it can give you superpowers. But what I've come to understand for myself about Wim's stuff, that it's not about superpowers. It's about powers that humans already have biologically, that they're already here, and that we've just factored out because of our penchant for comfort, because of our penchant for having using our technology and our minds essentially to take care of all of the external stresses that we have, so that we don't experience them on a daily basis. And that drive for comfort and essentially what homeostasis existed throughout probably the duration of human history, but we never had the power to achieve comfort at the flip of a switch until about 100 years ago. And evolutionarily, that's a blink of the eye. That's no period at all. Our species is at least 200,000 years old. And in that time, variations of nature, whether it be a snowstorm or a fine summer day or a scorching hot, trek across the desert, we had to survive all of those conditions. And it was our body's ability to adapt that let us do that. However, in the present day, where we live most of the year, is a perpetual sort of early summer environment, like the perfect, easy life. And that's what we simulate with climate control. And where we used to have changes in our light patterns, that would have to do with this, fireball in the sky called the sun, which many of your listeners have seen before. That doesn't go through the sky at a set amount of time. It's not 12 hours up, 12 hours off. It changes throughout the day. And that actually has impacts on our inner biology and the way we sleep and our sleep patterns. And, there's just so many things that we factored out because we have electric lighting, or we have heat, or we have other things that insulate us. And we do it because we're comfortable, but that comfort hides suffering. And that's what I'm trying to expose.
Right. And so in our efforts, so, if human beings basically were running off of this survival pattern, right, in our minds, unless we consciously override it, like the human response is like, what do I need to do to survive?
Right.
And like all those comfort cues are like early signals, like I'm a little bit chilly could turn into I'm freezing to death, and I'm a little peckish could turn into I'm starving to death. So we naturally, try to move, like comfort is like a really useful sort of early warning system.
Right.
But it seems to me that the function of culture and of like mature cultures, and I'm not talking about the United States or really most of like, modern consumer culture, but the purpose of culture was to take someone out of that and put them in some degree of danger. So, not that, students are jumping off of mountains believing they're bodhisattvas, or people are dying by the droves in harsh conditions, but that to move out of comfort does involve some degree of risk. It's not like doing a ropes course where the risk is all imaginary.
Right. I mean, you have to be careful, right? I mean, the whole process of evolution, right, is that the successful biological beings are able to pass on their genes successfully, and the ones that don't make it, die, and the genes never go forward. So evolution is a very violent process, and the stakes are always death and always life. So, I think we do have to bear that in mind when you talk about quality of life and how one might live beneficially. That's not what evolution cares about. Evolution cares about your genes moving down through the systems. But that said, we are the product of this billions of years. Yeah, billions of years. Life has been around for about 3 billion years on the planet. We are the product of billions of years of the winners. And they won because they were in these harsh environments. And we have those underlying abilities that are in our bodies now that are honed through eons and eons of evolution. And by taking out the evolutionary pressure, we are not exercising the systems that have made us so successful.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me when I bought my mother a computer, like, the only thing she used it for was like, email. And I'm like, well, look at this. Like, this is a really, and of course, it's not a great analogy because the computer didn't like pine away and get worse, and its RAM didn't shrink because it wasn't being used.
No, it did though. Think about it. That computer is old. It's obsolete already, probably.
Yeah, well, I don't know where it is anymore. So when you went out there, and this is all, I don't want to sort of rehash the book because everybody should get the book because it is a seriously life-changing book for anyone who is skeptical and likes science, because like there's like the science will blow you away. Right? So when you first got there to experience Wim's methods.
We like puns here. Keep the puns coming.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you haven't heard any of them before. So, your first experience of the method, like, tell me about that when you first got there.
So I landed in Poland and I met Wim, who doesn't, at first glance didn't seem all that impressive or intimidating. He looks like sort of a life-size garden gnome. He even had a pointy green hat on when I met him. And, he drives me out into the Polish sort of mountainous wilderness on the east side of no, sorry, the west side of Poland. And we, the first thing that happens is after we get out of the car, and I'm with two other sort of people who are paying to be on the course, and I'm coming as a journalist. And he sort of shows me a bunk, and I know I'm going to be there for a week just to see what's happening. And I'm in the top floor of his house, and I'm looking outside, and there's this dude in his underwear sitting in the snowy field throwing snow on himself, with steam coming off his body as the snow evaporates when it comes in contact with his skin. And I'm like, where on earth have I landed? Like, who is doing this stuff? And the guy I showed up with, a guy named Janis Kuz, says, I can't wait to get out there. And he runs off and strips off and goes outside with him. I'm like, I am surrounded by clearly insane people. But that night, I don't go out in the snow right then. And that night I'm sort of hanging out with Wim, and I'm trying to gauge him as a teacher, or sort of this guy who makes these really outlandish claims. And just because he seems so open, and also his flaws are so apparent, he's not the sort of guy who presents himself as a perfect individual by any means. And because his flaws were so apparent, he was an alcoholic for many, many years, a smoker, didn't eat particularly healthy. Because his flaws were so apparent, it actually made me feel that he might be a man that you could trust because with his claims. And it's sort of a converse idea. Usually you want these people to be the epitome of human health, but because his flaws were so apparent, I said, well, maybe there is something to him. Maybe he's not making claims that are just straight out outlandish. And the next day, the first thing we do is this breathing method where we're all lying in his yoga room in the front of the house, and it's freezing in there. So we're actually in our sleeping bags and lying down, and you do this hyperventilation method where you take 30 quick, deep breaths. We call it hyperventilation, but it's not that panicked hyperventilation. It's just like like that, and you get really dizzy, and it feels a little uncomfortable. You get tingly, and then you let all the air out of your lungs, and then you just hold it for as long as you can. And we do these repetitions where you hyperventilate and you hold your breath, and you hyperventilate and you hold your breath, and all of a sudden the amount of time that you can hold your breath just greatly extends. And I think the first time I did it, I was able to reach something like 2.5 minutes of breath retention with no air in my lungs. Whereas, if I'd done it before then and just tried to just hold my breath, I could maybe hold it for 30 seconds, maybe a minute, before I felt that urge to gasp. So I knew that this breathing method was hacking the way my gasp point worked. So what I did, what you do at the end of this breathing, and I think we breathe for about an hour, doing these cycles back and forth.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean,
I've been doing it this week for like 3 or 4 rounds, ending with push-ups, as you suggest,
right,
just for a morning routine. And like this morning, I had, in the middle of like round 2, I forgot what I was doing.
Like, totally happens.
I pushed the little button on. I got his app, and I pushed the little button, and like it says 27 seconds. Like, where am I? What's going on? Like an hour must be like mental.
You get some really deep spots. So I recommend a 15-minute routine every morning in the book, but as you go deeper, the experiences get more profound. There's different physiological things happen to you along that journey. But I think that 15 minutes is a great daily practice. But you mentioned the push-ups, and let's remind your listeners of what happens is that after doing these repetitions of breath, of breathing and retention, I worked up to, I think, about 2.5 minutes. And then you do another round of breathing where you hyperventilate, let all the air out of your lungs, and just start doing push-ups. And I knew, I'm a normal guy. I'm not in particularly great shape. I could do about 20 push-ups. But when I did this breathing, while holding my breath with empty lungs, I did 40. which doubled my number, which was astounding to me. And they felt easy. And it was just one of these things where I'm like, wow, Wim has this thing that he's figured out. He's figured out how to hack something in my physiology to like double my strength. And I knew then that there was something very, very cool about this method. And as I went and I did all these feats in the ice, it just became easier and easier. But let me ask you, turn the interview around, since you've been doing the breathing, how's your experience with the push-ups been?
So I'm embarrassed to say that I've also doubled it. And so now I'm doing 20.
Awesome.
Like I'm not a weak dude, but for some reason there's something, I'm doing something wrong with push-ups. So I've got to get that checked out because like I fatigue really quickly, or maybe I'm just going down really far or something. But, I definitely had that experience like the very first time I did it. And the weird thing is I've been doing breath hold push-ups for years, actually, because I do a martial art called Sistema,
Oh, okay.
which in a lot of ways is very, very similar. So we don't do ice cold showers, but every morning, like I'll pour 5 gallons of cold tap water on my body while I stand outside.
Whoa, awesome. Okay.
Yeah, so that was fun in May. It was delightful in August, and now it's fucking miserable in February.
Right.
But like now's when I come in feeling proud of myself.
Oh, well, I have to say, in the summer, I feel like it's lame. Like you go outside, it's so easy. And I enjoy nothing more than jumping in my cold shower now because the pipes are, running through the ground here in Denver and it's cold. It's coming out of the tap at like, oh, I should measure it. But it feels like, maybe 50 or 48 degrees. And I love it. I feel like in the summer, the tap water runs so warm that it's like it's barely even a challenge.
So that's one of the things I had in my notes to ask you about just personally is like, at what point do you start not dreading this? Because I've been doing the basically a double ice bucket challenge every single morning since May, and every single day I wake up and I try to talk myself out of it.
Yep. Yeah, totally. And I don't think that will ever change. I think that is the hardest thing that a person can do, probably in life in general, is stand in a warm shower and then turn it to cold. I mean, I think that is the absolute hardest thing that because you're in this comfortable spot and it feels so good. And then you're like, really, I have to do this? And it doesn't get easy to do, but afterwards you feel so great. Right. And then even after just, 2 or 3 seconds of this cold water coming down on me, then I remember that it's actually not so bad. But I feel like I do teach myself that every single time. And maybe that's why the method is so good, because it actually works on, that's basically my own subconscious saying, no, I don't want to be uncomfortable. And that's me telling it to shut up. And it's a hard thing to do. And if you do it every day, every morning, then that's something that makes the rest of the day easier. It's showing that it's a small thing, right, to turn a knob, but it's also a really hard thing to do. And it's really nice. And I don't find the cold difficult to deal with. It's really just the decision to go into the cold, which is hard.
Yeah, that's one of the things that they talk about a lot in my practice is it's the discipline comes from like filling up the bucket.
Right.
Like once you're pouring it, you're not going to stop.
Mm-hmm.
You're
committed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is an issue with with any sort of practice, right? Is that getting yourself into a disciplined routine is the hardest point. If I'm sitting doing the breathing routine, I don't do it every day because sometimes I just would rather have coffee, and that's me succumbing to my comfort more than anything else. Whereas once I do the breathing, once I do 3 breaths, I know I can do the whole thing. It's not going to be a big deal, but it is the sitting down and the discipline to get yourself there, which is so important. And I always feel better once I've done it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the paradox.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've retrained my nervous system to not flinch. Like I discovered. So one of the things I've been doing since I read your book is now I'm running shirtless.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm running different routes so more people will see me.
Yeah, right, totally.
I'm totally embarrassed by that revelation. But I'm like, hey, this, like the trafficy roads that I usually avoid. Like, I'm like, oh, look, now they'll see this dude running at, 35 degrees and with no shirt. And that will
Right.
be
Well,
me.
one of the first shirtless runs I did was actually in Central Park, and which is the most visible place to do it. And it was in the middle of, I think it was like March, and it was snowy and cold. And everyone's sort of like heads turning and high fiving, and there's this sort of showboaty thing about it, and it's sort of maybe feeds a certain ego side of things. But it's also fun, and I think that it's important to have fun with these practices that look extreme, but then that really aren't. Once you're running and you're actually moving, if you have a hat on and maybe gloves if it's really cold, so your extremities don't plummet too much. You're generating so much heat from running that it doesn't actually feel bad. It's only bad in that first minute or two as you're working up heat. And if you do like push-ups beforehand, you're not cold ever on the runs.
Oh, okay. I'll try that. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I discover is that most of my aversion to cold was my aversion to my reaction to the cold. It was this sort of squeaky flinch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my family thinks this is hilarious. Like when they're up and I'm doing it, they'll look out the window shaking their heads. Like, cause this is the guy, if I was at the stove cooking and someone like took their moderately cold hand and like touched my back with it, my bare
Yeah.
back, I would like freak out and yell at them and scream.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm calling in the book the wedge, right? And this is sort of one of the concepts that I use to explain what the Wim Hof method really is doing, which is, and you're using the word flinch, right? But I would describe that as that's your automatic reaction, is that shock it's like tweaking your fight or flight responses actually,
Yeah.
And what you're doing is using your mind to master this panicky response that you have, and that actually has a huge impact on your body in general. It's putting your mind, your conscious mind, in control of what is essentially an unconscious process. And I sort of think that is one of the ways that humans learn to use their bodies in the first place, is that when you're an infant, right, you don't really control anything in your body. You're sort of plopped out into the world and you have to sort of figure out what you're doing. And as you control your limbs, you're extending mental control over physical processes. Although, we look at them as very easy now, like, walking or, using your arms. But at that point, it's a struggle to get anywhere, and you're developing neural connections to do it. So what we're doing when that your wife touches your back with her icy cold hands, that flinch response is like your autonomic response. And then what you're doing is saying, no, look, it's not that bad. It's just a sensation. The sensation won't kill me. I'll be fine. And then you're subduing that. And then you actually gain control by an almost sort of like, it's difficult to explain how it exactly happens, but controlling that sort of panicky response to the cold seems to extend also over control over like your autonomic nervous system for immune issues. And it's a weird connection to have, and it doesn't seem straightforward at first, except that your immune system seems to have some connection to your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah. And I haven't experienced that particular thing yet. But I mean, what I do notice, first of all, that when someone touches me with their ice cold hands, it doesn't feel that cold anymore. So partly like physiologically, like the blood vessels and capillaries have changed, but also what I was experiencing, I was magnifying with this, crazy feedback loop and turning it into like swords and daggers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And our brains are designed to panic. It loves to panic. It's like a hobby, right? And when you give it sort of rational information, all of a sudden standing in the snow for 5 minutes really isn't that big of a deal. Like, and jumping into ice water, I promise you, no matter what ice water you jump into, it'll be very difficult for it to get below 32 degrees, right?
Right.
If you add some salt, you might be able to get it down to 30 degrees. But ice water is liquid for a reason. And we know that in 32 degrees, you're not going to get hypothermia in 5 minutes. It's just not going to happen.
Right. Well, I've yet to try that one.
Oh, well, do a polar bear plunge. Man, it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about like at the moment, like all the things I've missed out on because I was always like a water wimp and a cold wimp, and like we'd be on vacation somewhere and the like it would be like an 82-degree pool and everyone's having fun and I'm like, no, I think I just want to read. Like it was this total fear of that kind of discomfort.
Right.
So many things I've missed out on specifically around cold and wet, and
Yeah.
I'm kind of relishing, and it's amazing how quickly, like you write, the first time is going to be the worst.
Hmm.
It's amazing how quickly it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, it's like it's awe-inspiring, and it comes down to a question of evolution, right? Our ancestors, the ones who are crossing deserts and climbing mountains with a whisper of what we have for technology now, were, their biology had to adapt quickly, and if it didn't adapt quickly, they didn't pass on their genes, right? It wasn't like snowstorms coming. I'll talk to you in 3 months when I'm ready for it. No, it was like snowstorms coming, cold front. Let's get down to business, and a lot of those early warning signs, those panics, are just warnings, right? And if your body doesn't have a baseline to identify the danger of a stimulus, it's going to trigger its warnings super early. And if it sort of has been through the rounds a few times, it's not going to worry as much. And then you can start really assessing what real danger is. Because there is danger out there. Like we can't, go infinite amounts of endurance. You can't throw me into the vacuum of space and my suppression of my shiver response is going to, let me live. I'll die, right? Just like you might expect. But I can do a lot more than I ever anticipated. And I climbed up this mountain in Poland, but at the end of the book, I'm tackling Mount Kilimanjaro, which is the tallest mountain in Africa, and I'm doing it shirtless and in shorts most of the way. And there's times when it dips down to -30 with wind chill, and I'm not exactly comfortable, but I'm okay, and I know where where my limits are, and I also know when to put on a jacket, right? I also know where that is, but it's way farther away than you might expect.
Yeah, it's so interesting that like the word okay is so crucial because it basically means I'm going to live through this. Like
Hmm.
it didn't destroy me. And a
Right.
lot of my coaching with people around health is they don't understand why they're binging, why they're not getting up in the morning, and it's usually like some feeling comes up, like they're scared of something or they have anxiety or depression or fear, and that immediately translates into I've got to get rid of this feeling, and the way I know how to do that is with food, usually.
Ah, right. Uh-huh. Yeah.
And and so the ability to sit through whatever feeling and say, this sucks. It's not supposed to not suck, but
Hmm.
I'm okay.
Hmm.
Like that baseline of I'm not, what doesn't kill us, right?
Hmm.
It's like I'm okay. It can feel like such an empowering realization because we spent our whole lives trying to avoid this thing that we thought would never be okay.
Yeah. And many of your listeners are listening to this right now and thinking to themselves, well, these guys might be able to handle the cold, but I am especially unable to handle the cold. Like no one is as unable to handle the cold as me. And this is a universal thing that I hear when I'm talking about this book. I know you, listener, are thinking this right now. And it's what everyone thinks, and it's just not true. Unless you have there are certain actual medical conditions that do occasionally show up for people, but you probably don't have them, right? And I'm not just talking about Raynaud's disease. I'm talking about I think it's called chilibans. Like there's certain reactions where your body is so used to comfort that you're just so out of kilter, like forever, you have to go really, really slowly to get anywhere. But the truth is that we are made to be able to adapt to this. And the part of you that's saying is that I am especially unable to handle this is your inner wimp talking.
I feel like ending this by editing in like my kids talking about me for 2 minutes because I was like I would have been that listener. Like nobody hates the cold and the wet more than me.
I mean, it's everyone, right? It's a universal human response for all of us who have lived most of our lives at 72 degrees. rain or shine, snow or sun. We don't have a temperature variations in our lives. So why would our body want to go to something that feels extreme? I lived in India for a long time. And this is actually really interesting. And I don't think I've ever mentioned this on podcasts before, is that India is a pretty hot place, right? You can run into 44 degrees Celsius, which I guess is like 120, which is not nice to be outside in. But, you know, when I had air conditioning, I had an apartment. And when I had air conditioning, it was awesome because I'd go inside and I could be cool and it would feel great because I was dehumidified and all that stuff. But then I couldn't go outside anymore because it just felt unbearable. I couldn't deal with that heat anymore. But in the times when I didn't have air conditioning, when I'm traveling, I'm an investigative journalist. I've done like the war correspondent stuff, and I've traveled in sort of the really difficult areas in India. Or when I was a college student living there in the deserts of Rajasthan, the air conditioning was sort of a treat that you go into sometimes, and it actually started to make me feel sick when I was in AC because my body was getting used to dealing with the heat, and that changed the way my sweat glands work, the way the capillaries and the surface of my skin dissipated heat, and you get used to sort of different sets of temperature variation, and these technological crutches that we use, which at times can be nice, actually stop your body from being able to inhabit the environments that they're designed to survive in.
Right. It's like we're, when you look at it globally, we are the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like I remember listening to an interview with Ram Dass from 30 years ago where he's sitting stuck in traffic, cursing the traffic. And then he goes, oh, you know what? I am the traffic.
Right.
It's like we are the environment. We are other people's environments. And we were designed for Earth, not for, Holiday Inn.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. And I sort of end the book on that idea in the epilogue is that, we are drastically changing the environment with our technological advancement and using intense amounts of resources to feed this drive for comfort that we all have, and that we don't need to do that. We can just try to feel a little bit more in touch with the world around us, and we'll be okay. It won't kill us.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things, when I started working with people on their health, it was largely about food and nutrition. And, I can teach people what to eat in about 12 seconds, and I can give them all the information they need on an index card. So it clearly wasn't knowledge, right? It was implementation, and people would feel like I said, they'd have these negative feelings, and they would immediately reach for comfort foods, highly palatable, fatty, processed foods.
Delicious.
To make themselves feel better in the moment. And that's a really hard thing to train out of people. And what I discovered is that when you train people to experience discomfort, whether it's like, I'm going to sprint for 30 seconds and it hurts and it sucks, or I'm going to do this breathing exercise for 2 minutes, or I'm going to pour a bucket of ice water over my head, like those, they have a finite endpoint. It's not like you may never have a Snickers bar for the rest of your life,
right?
But the skill of not sort of indulging your comfort in the moment is a really transferable skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And it brings up this idea, which is sort of a catchword these days, of resilience. Is that we are designed to be resilient, and if you start exercising those muscles, you get a robustness in general, and you get healthier, mentally and physically healthier.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because you've done a great job of distilling and explaining some of the science. And and when I read the science chapter, that's when my greed gland started going off. It's like I could be like the billionaire founder of a chain of spas that had all this stuff available for people. Because
do it, man. I'll get behind you.
Well, so all the investors who are listening, just get in touch. But it's like, there haven't been that many people who've done this, so there haven't been that many people to study. But as it grows in popularity, like it's clear to me that the research is going to show incredible benefits. Like
Mhm.
it's, you can do as much with cold therapy for diabetics, for type 2 diabetics, as you can with like, significant dietary changes. Can you talk a
Right.
little bit about like the big scientific findings that
Oh
really
my God.
convinced you this wasn't just like you hallucinating in the snow?
Yeah, well, there's several, and I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of them.
Pick two or three.
But the most interesting study on whim, I believe, is something called the endotoxin study, and this is where a lot of people, uh, gravitate to why the Wim Hof method is useful for autoimmune illnesses. So Wim, being the crazy guy that he is, uh, said had a conversation with a doctor, an immunologist over at Radboud University in the Netherlands, named Peter Pickers, and his student Matthias Cox. And he said to them, I can consciously turn off my immune system. How that conversation started, I really have no clue, because who says something like that? But he did, and Pickers is very well known and very well respected for developing a test for immunosuppressant drugs like cyclosporin. And what those drugs are useful for is if you got like an organ transplant, your body would naturally look at that spare kidney that you have, and see it as a foreign invader, and it would try to attack and destroy it. So what you do is you dose yourself with something called cyclosporin or various other autoimmune suppressants to turn your immune system down or even off so that it doesn't reject the organ. So he developed a test to see if an immunosuppressant drug actually did what it was supposed to do, which was he would inject somebody with a heat-killed E. coli bacteria called endotoxin. So it's not the live bacteria, but it has all the signals on its membrane that says that it's a dangerous invader. And if somebody gets injected with endotoxin, their immune response immediately activates, which means you'll get a fever, you'll have achy joints, runny nose, all of the normal primary immune responses that you have. And the way he would tell if an immunosuppressant drug worked was that that person wouldn't have those reactions. So Wim, making this claim that he could consciously turn off his immune system, which was technically impossible according to the science of the moment, Picker said, well, this is easy enough to test. So they injected Wim with endotoxin, and lo and behold, there was no reaction. All he complained about was a minor headache. His immune system never turned on. And in fact, the blood that they withdrew, the blood samples that he withdrew, never, even when it was outside of his body for multiple days, I think it was 3 or 4 days, it never worried about the endotoxin. So not only was he able to suppress his own immune system, the blood itself outside of his body was able to do the same thing. And this was mind-blowing for the scientists. They were like, this is almost a new paradigm shift. So the scientists would argue that, people who read the paper was like, this is an interesting study, but maybe Wim is a freak. Maybe he's got some sort of genetic thing that he's just not responsive to endotoxin. And about 1% of people who get injected with the drug have a response similar to Wim's. So Wim made a follow-up claim that not only was he able to suppress his own immune system, he could teach other people to do the same thing in only a week. So Pickers and Cox took him up on his second challenge, and Wim took 12 Dutch college students into his training program in Poland, the same exact training program that I did. And at the end of that, they took him back to Holland, and they injected all of them with endotoxin, and they all repeated Wim's results, showing that this was showing that you can consciously suppress an immune response. And that is huge. This article, whenever it was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and it got nods on Nature's website. It was all over the internet because it said it proved something that was impossible, is that you can consciously suppress immune responses. And the implications for that are enormous, because every autoimmune disease is essentially your body attacking itself. So rheumatoid arthritis, when your immune system identifies its joints as foreign invaders, it could theoretically be reversed by Wim's things. Crohn's disease, to some degree, Parkinson's and alopecia, all sorts of things where your immune system is going haywire. It seems that you can use the Wim Hof method to reverse it. And in the book, I asked that question, can I find people who've done this? And I outlined 4 case studies of people who, were crippled by one illness or another, and then were using the Wim Hof method very successfully to counteract their symptoms.
Right. So what was he doing, and what did he teach them to do, like in the moment? So was it like consciously, like directing the immune cells to chill? Was he breathing? Was he doing ice baths right beforehand?
So they did the ice training. So that's the getting used to being calm in the ice, and suppressing your autonomic response to shiver. That's the basic cold method that you use. So if you're in that environment that's supposed to make you panic, you suppress that and you try to relax. That's the cold method. And the breathing is what I explained earlier, the hyperventilation and retention. And during the test, they had done the cold training for a week, and I think they had done the breathing right before they got injected with endotoxin. So it's a daily method. You really have to do this all the time. And what they did in the moment while they were being injected, I think they used this sort of third eye meditation, which is something you do in the breathing exercises, which is just sort of calm your mind and not really think about anything, but just focus on whatever you see behind the lids of your eyes. A very, very entry level basic meditation. And that's really all they did. And the responses were great. And incidentally, growing up, for me, I was always afflicted by canker sores, which are these sort of lesions that you get in your mouth that might be related to a version of the herpes virus. But I got them since I was 1 year old. And I think because I was introduced to that virus at such a young age, it was actually very virulent in my body. And I could get these dime-sized lesions in my mouth. And I would get them like every month, and it would take a week for them to go away. Unable to smile, very difficult to talk. Like, it was really a horrible thing. I started to think of myself as a canker sore survivor instead of just someone who had some of these sores. And since doing the method, I don't get them anymore, which is amazing. It's like the biggest relief, because this was a horrible thing for me to deal with. But they just don't come. And the only thing I can attribute it to is the method.
And so you're not like trying to go in and like consciously hack something, right? It's just the method itself. I mean, it doesn't turn off your immune system, obviously, because you're not getting colds and flus and.
I still can be susceptible to the normal range of illness, but I think I recover quicker because of it. And the thing with the autoimmune response, and I think this is the reason why the Wim Hof method works, is to going back to this idea of homeostasis. Now, remember, our ancestors, constantly variable environments, also a range of viruses and bacteria in the natural environment that we would always be afflict us. And now we live in these sort of antiseptic places, where not only does our nervous system not get a lot of stimulus through temperature and various other environmental things, but also we don't get the bacteria and the other things that help train our immune system to deal with a diverse environment. The immune system itself, however, evolutionarily has to be aggressive. It has to be a predator for all of these incoming threats that it has to deal with. And the immune system and the nervous system, the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems, are connected at some point where they sort of have to work in concert to deal with external threats. Now, when you start doing the method and you start giving yourself external stimuli that trigger your fight or flight response, and then you modulate that fight or flight response, it's very similar to giving that wolf predator in your immune system, all these macrophages and killer T cells and neutrophils and all those specific cells. It's like giving that thing a chew toy to deal with. And so then it's like, oh, I got this to deal with. And so it doesn't have to go bother your joints that it was basically chewing on. And I'm sure this is rigorously scientific to use this language. It's giving it a hobby, more or less.
And so, and the implication there is that it's not like turned off for everything. It's just turned off for things that aren't really threats.
Exactly. So that, so, and it gives you more robustness to deal with these illnesses. I don't know if you've seen these viral videos that are going around right now on the internet of kids in Siberia.
Yes.
Throwing ice water on themselves during their recess, and then coming back in for some hot tea at the end of like 5 minutes in the snow. And the teachers at that school are saying that their kids don't get sick anymore because their bodies have something to do. And that's really counterintuitive. That's not what we do in America at all, right? We think of our kids as these things need to be put in bubble wrap and never exposed to a danger, because a free range kid in America can get you arrested and have CPS called on you.
Right.
But in truth, and when I was a kid, I was running around in the muck all the time, playing a game I called Adventure, which basically meant I got to pick up sticks and hit trees with them, or, whatever I was doing as a child. And I was exposed to sort of a wide variety of stuff. And I think that is good. And I think that we need to encourage those sorts of activities growing up, because it seems to, obviously you don't want to get people into danger. We don't want people to get hurt or kidnapped or any of those things, but we also don't want to coddle something so much that the unconscious, the nervous system doesn't have a chance to learn to deal with stress. And that's, I think, one of the biggest threats, in rearing a child anyway, that we have going right now.
Right. And it ties into our sort of cognitive bias for avoiding like instantaneous danger versus long-term degradation. Like we're much more scared of terrorist attacks than heart attacks.
Yeah, right.
Which statistically is stupid as hell.
Yeah. Oh, totally. We're so afraid of the big name brand fears, the name brand boogeyman, that we forget that the real boogeyman is our lifestyle. The real boogeyman is the way the way you live your life day in and day out, not the masked bandit that's going to ruin your life. Although there are masked bandits out there, and they are terrible to run into, but the likelihood of that is very, very low.
So one more science bit that I'd love to talk about, because I'm imagining there's more than a few people on the listening who are interested in weight loss.
Sure.
What's the skinny on weight loss using the Wim Hof method, or and it's not just about Wim Hof. You also talk about these other athletes who do extreme things.
Yeah, I mean, we're using Wim Hof as shorthand. I mean, the book is really about the environmental exposure, and he just was able to be a nice door into this method and gives a method to it. Versus just an idea. But so with obesity and diabetes, these are issues where you essentially have too much energy in your physical system, and that gets stored as fat. And for diabetes, you have the sugar and insulin resistance, which is also a part of it. And many of your listeners probably know that if you have a pot belly and you want to go out and exercise it off, it becomes very, very difficult to do that, because your body would much rather burn muscle and sort of name brand tissue than it would fat in order to fuel the exercise. So that exercise, while it can over time decrease your weight, it's a very, very inefficient and difficult way to do it. Now, the reason for this is because white fat, actually serves a different purpose in the body, and it's not to store it for food energy. That's its secondary purpose. Its primary purpose is there to heat your body in a pinch. And we're all born, every infant Every human infant is born with something called brown fat or brown adipose tissue, which is a fat-like substance that sits on your thorax and in between your shoulders. That its only role is to suck white fat from your body and burn it for heat energy, what doctors call thermogenesis. And babies need this because when they're born, they don't have the musculature or digestive system or circulation system to heat the body the way every adult does. When we move around, our muscles generate heat by just the kinetic motion of it, and our digestive systems are moving, and that friction and whatever those movements are create body temperature. But for an infant who doesn't have that very developed digestive and circulatory system and a very high surface area to mass ratio, it loses heat very quickly. The only way they survive is by sucking out those baby fat rolls and transforming that into heat. Which is why premature babies who don't have fat need to hang out in incubators for so long, because they don't have any way to deal with this thermogenesis. So as we get older, in Western civilizations, brown fat disappears and we start relying on our muscle activity to heat us up. And until 2007, almost every doctor in the world thought that brown fat was this vestigial tissue in adults and didn't really exist until a study in 2007 by a doctor named Aaron Sipis over at Harvard, who's moved on to NIH now. He was looking at these like weird blobs in PET CT scans for cancer patients that would always show up as cancerous tumors in human bodies. But when they biopsied it, they never found anything at those tumor spots. So he was trying to figure out what these weird splotches were. The way PET CT scans work is they actually test metabolism. So they inject you with this radioactive dye, and that gets picked up by metabolically active tissues, which tumors are one of those tissues that's metabolically active. So that's how you identify tumors. But what were these splotches? And so Sipis eventually deduced that the locations of where the splotches were correspond to where brown fat, this vestigial tissue, is supposed to be. And he realized that the rooms where people were getting their PET CT scans done were cold, and that these people were sitting in these cold scanners and their brown fat was lighting up because it was trying to heat the person's body up and suck white fat from their systems and burn it for heat. And this sparked a huge research initiative at the NIH and other institutions to find out if we can use BAT to if it's active in adults, if we can supercharge that, we could turn off, you could use that as a way to lose weight very rapidly. So that's where the state of that research is. And as we've and to go into the full discussion of it, it's actually going to take a rather long time. But the crux is that people who regularly expose themselves to cold are able to build up BAT, brown fat, or other metabolic tissues in other parts of the body to compensate for the cold. And we've seen people lose weight very, very rapidly by being cold. When I was with Wim, I lost 7 pounds in 7 days. And I was eating a Polish diet of pierogies and sausage and whatever else Polish people eat. And it was just because my body was very, very active at trying to heat itself. And eventually I built up BAT, and that's great. Now I can deal with the cold, and I'm using my fat as the fuel to heat my body.
So instead, you're using your fat for the primary purpose for which it exists in the first place.
Exactly. And isn't that grand, right? And with diabetes, another study that I mentioned in the book, they put 12 guys who are overweight with diabetes in a room in Germany that was 51 degrees. And they put them there for 3 hours a day. They were just wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and they just watched TV, I assume. And after 3 weeks of this treatment, their insulin resistance, which is it's what you're measuring when you're measuring the effect of diabetes, reduced by 54% just by being cold. That's all they did. And that's amazing.
Yeah. So, and in the book, I loved, the irony of, okay, we've discovered that this brown adipose tissue is amazing. And so now, of course, all the pharmaceuticals are pouring billions of dollars for the next weight loss blockbuster. in this reductionist quest in the assumption that it's only the brown fat or the brown
Hmm.
fat between the shoulder blades that is gonna set off this reaction. And you make the point is, yeah, well, maybe there's something there, but we don't know what else that drug is going to do, and we don't know what else. We've just discovered this. We don't know how the whole system works, but we do know that being cold works all of it.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's so typical of the American scientific pharmacological paradigm, right? To be like, oh, we have an idea, we found a tissue in the body, we're going to maximize its effort, and that's the whole key to the success. And then, 5 years later, they realize that it was too myopic a view, and actually, there's more stuff. And so, the cold is great, and what they found with those diabetic men is they thought that they would have more BAT after 3 weeks. But when they measured the BAT, it had remained unchanged. And they found that actually the muscles built a thermogenic material in the muscles instead. That they increased the mitochondria in the muscle tissue.
Hmm.
And so but the cold does so many things. Like the stimulus that that helped these diabetic men out was the cold. It wasn't BAT, and the cold also did other things. Like when you jump into cold water, you'll have vasoconstriction, which means your arteries and veins will constrict and put the blood into your core, and so you have all these muscles in your veins that are designed to do that one specific task, but you can't actually trigger vasoconstriction consciously. You can't be like, constrict hand, and then your hand will get cold because all the blood comes up into your core. The only way to do it is by, say, jumping in snow or taking a cold shower or whatever else. And the people who don't expose themselves to environmental changes never exercise those muscles. So they get weak, and that leads to cardiovascular disease, which is one of the number one killers in society. And so the stimulus of the cold is really, really important, not just for this BAT stuff, but for all sorts of different metabolic symptoms. So why are we focusing on pills to be shortcuts for our health when really what our health is designed to do, what our bodies are designed to do, is to resist stimulus, and that was what makes us healthy. So get uncomfortable and don't just assume a pill is going to make you better.
We could transcribe what you just said, remove cold, and talk about diet, and get like a healthy diet deals with everything: diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, various macular degeneration. And meanwhile, we see how quickly and easily these things can be reversed through eating our natural, authentic human diet, and
Hmm.
and seeing everybody on these pills that at best are holding the symptoms at bay a little bit while they slowly
Right.
decline. And so it's kind of part and parcel of the same thing. My business partner and I, Josh Lejani, and I run a program called the Big Change Program, and we talk about vitamin P as an essential nutrient, which is pain, which is
Nice.
exactly what you're talking about. That
Hmm.
that our profit driven economy is looking for ways to serve it to us in a proprietary pill. But
Right.
it's, and you can say, well, food, organic healthy food might be more expensive, and there's cases in which that's true, but there's nobody saying that, like, the water that's in the oceans, rivers, streams, and lakes of our planet that we spend trillions of dollars to heat, if we just used it at its normal temperature, would have this profound healing effect on most of the things that kill us.
Well, it's crazy, and I don't want to diminish, the pharmaceutical industry, because obviously there are things that are fantastic about it, right? I mean, obviously antibiotics are one of the things that have allowed human civilization to flourish, right? There are wonderful things with medicine, and nothing about this book says get rid of doctors, right? Medical science is fantastic, but certainly profit-driven medicine has an agenda, which is to generate more profits, and they realize that we want shortcuts, and that a lot of the interventions that we have are trying to be shortcuts to sort of what a healthy lifestyle can give you. And there's going to be no pill that will give you a healthy lifestyle. You actually have to put in the work.
Right. And one of the things I think is so appealing about the cold therapy is that it's a different kind of work, and it's work that I think a lot of people could see themselves doing, if even if they couldn't see themselves giving up their favorite crappy foods.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
There's something accessible, and it feels like, just like you talked about the superpowers. Like there's something about this that feels like a very, very powerful gateway to a healthy lifestyle in all other aspects.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And when you are able to, uh, realize that the health relies on three pillars of diet, exercise, and environment, rather than just diet and exercise,
Mm.
you're able to now deal with three different variables to make your life better. And you could still eat crap, but if you have a very good environmental routine, that will help modulate the crappiness of your crappy diet. Um, I still think you should eat healthy, right? But when I was in Poland, I was eating horrible food, right? I was eating pierogies and oil and sausage and all the delicious, fun stuff, and I was losing weight because the environment was the pillar that I was focusing on. And what you really do need is balance in all three of those to sort of address your health. But you can modulate where you put those things. But the first step is realizing that all three are important.
Right. Well, in a way, in a natural environment, they would be inextricably linked.
Linked.
They would be synergistic. You couldn't get your food without going out into the environment and exerting yourself.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
the more calories you took in, like you couldn't go to Costco and buy a 3.5 pound bag of nuts, right? You just
Right.
you just couldn't get things, even natural foods, in unnatural quantities.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to get what you need, you had to brave an environment until we had, sort of tiered capitalism and you could pay someone else to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And this is not to say that the modern world is bad, right? Or that the comforts that are available to us are evil in some way. I mean, they can certainly be taken for granted, but I certainly haven't sold my house and gone to live in a cave, right? I haven't ditched, but obviously I have an internet connection. I'm talking to you over Skype right now. We live in the very best time ever in the history of humans to be alive. And because we have so much available to us, so much education, so much knowledge, so many abilities. Like, hey, I can fly across the world in an airplane, right? I can do all these crazy adventures, things that even our parents would have had trouble conceiving of as like sort of a lifestyle. And I guess what the point of this book is to realize that with all those advantages also comes the responsibility of understanding how to use them in a way that that's not to our detriment. And comfort is one of those things we have to keep an eye on. Are you getting too comfortable? And when you are, get outside that zone, push yourself a little bit. I mean, this is why the obstacle course race industry is so big in the United States right now and across the world, right? Why are people, running the Spartan race and the Tough Mudder and, Warrior Dash and all these other things? Why are they crawling under barbed wire in the mud and jumping hurdles and fire and stuff? They're doing it because part of them realizes that stress, it doesn't just make a good Facebook post, but it's actually really beneficial to be in those environments. And there's something primal that they're trying to reach out for. And I think that's all really good. I'm really heartened by the rise of this sort of suffering, or what we think of as suffering, but actually isn't. It's actually pretty fun. And it's good that this is happening. And I think that my book is tapping into some of those underlying drives that are in society right now.
Yeah. What it reminded me of was there's a West African shaman named Malidoma Some who wrote a book on initiation. And what in his like, if you looked at what the 12 and 13-year-olds in his tribe went through, you'd say, oh my God, that's horrible. That's barbaric. Thank God I didn't have to go through that. And in fact, there are the occasional, every decade or so, there's the occasional death from the ordeal. And, Westerners are aghast. And he says, well, but look at your uninitiated children. Look at them trying to initiate themselves through gangs, through risky behavior, through alcohol, through drag racing,
Right.
all this stuff. So it's like we understand at some primal level that we need these challenges in order to not
Hmm.
go crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's a cultural thing that's very important. What separates the child from the adult, and we feel like we need a challenge to overcome to prove that we are now a responsible, productive member of society. And I don't really go into this in the book in great detail, but I think it is something very important to that part of being an adult is being able to face the world as it is, and yeah, we have no formal way of doing that really in the United States, and in much of the world. We're not going to go to war, right, or anything like that, kill a lion or whatever it is. But in that sort of separation from being a boy to being a man, or from being a girl into being a woman, is very important as part of the human process, and it happens for at least most of us at some point, right? At some point, you're like, oh, I'm a man now, but it's nice that there's a clearly defined, certain cultures have this clearly defined, and that has been an enduring human tradition.
Right. So I'm looking at the clock, and I realize I've already taken up 11 minutes more of your time than I than I threatened to. Uh,
Oh my God.
I just I just want to so an hour, 71 minutes of discomfort with me. You should develop some brown adipose tissue out of that. But one final question is, like, how has this whole project changed you?
I think that that question of resilience is very important. It's understanding that my limits aren't stuck in my youth, right? Is that I can still take challenges as I enter, I'm 8 now. That I still have a lot of robustness. I can still do these things. And I'm not scared of being out in these environments. And I feel good when I take cold showers, and my canker sores are going. I mean, it's really affected a lot of different parts of my life. And it's a journey, and I'm still tweaking it. I'm still not perfect at it, and I don't think, I wouldn't expect the readers to be perfect at it. I don't expect people to go out and go climb Kilimanjaro. But I think having this perspective change is very beneficial, and I'm a happier person for it.
Hmm. So if folks want to follow you and find out what you're up to and
Ah,
more, what can they do?
Google is a great tool. My name is Scott Carney. The book is What Doesn't Kill Us. If you are not bored after the 71 minutes of me talking, there's an audio book available on iBooks and Audible,
Oh,
Twitter,
do you read?
Facebook. I do. I read it. I read it in my closet with a real audio engineer outside my closet. But
Oh, I'm so jealous.
and it was a lot of fun to do it. It turned out actually really good. And it's a great way to support the book. But also, the key that what I want people to do is read it and then be like, oh my God, I have to go try this. And I think I explain it in a way that it's understandable, and it's going to make people want to go run outside without their shirt in the middle of winter and get looked at like crazy people. But the thing is, you're not the crazy ones. It's the people who are sitting in their cocoon of comfort all the time. They're the crazy ones.
Right on. Well, the book worked on me,
Awesome.
and I downloaded the Wim Hof app, and I'm seriously considering taking one of the trainings. So it was definitely infectious, and it's beautifully written. It goes into it's so much more than we talked about, and I think it's definitely on my top 10 books that have influenced me in my life so far. So I'm so grateful for the work you've done, and I look forward to staying in touch and seeing what you come up with next.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me on. And, well, maybe we'll do it again when the next one comes out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Scott.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Plant Yourself podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. For more information about the Big Change Program led by me and Josh Lajani, visit bigchangeprogram.com. And be sure to check out the show notes for today's episodes with links to everything we talked about at plantyourself.com/197. If you're new to the show, you can catch up on 196 archived episodes over at plantyourself.com. And if you get the podcast, but not the Big Change Bulldog, you can sign up at plantyourself.com/never and get the Sometimes Say Never report at the same time. Today's show is brought to you by walking. Bipedal locomotion, it's the wave of the future. Walking undoes some of the imbalances caused by too much sitting and provides a great opportunity to enhance neuromuscular coordination through contralateral motion, which is arms and legs moving in opposite directions. Plus, walking in nature or walking with friends just feels good. So, when can you take a 10-minute walk today? Thanks, as always, to Plant Yourself podcast patrons: Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Marrow, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jen Volkanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elsbeth Feldman. Sorry, Elsbeth. I'm going to try again. Elsbeth Feldman, Victoria Dolomanova, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Julianne Rowland, Stu Dolnick, Sarah Durkis, rhymes with circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Leanne Peterson, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, and Tom Franzak for your generous support of the podcast. Thanks also to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his gorgeous song, Sabali Dawn, Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can share this and other episodes on social media and via email. You could write a review on iTunes. I got a whole bunch of new reviews. I'm going to give you 2 today and then 2 next week. Here's one. I am hooked, from iTunes user Eat Plants Love. I am new, Eat Plants Love says, to the podcasting world, and after hearing Howard interview his guests with such thought-provoking insight, I am now a loyal fan. I am not new to the plant-based world, but after listening to each of Howard's podcasts, I consistently walk away with new information or a new perspective. I highly recommend listening to the Plant Yourself series of podcasts to just enhance your current understanding of the plant-based world and human behavior. Keep them coming. Oh, thank you so much, Eat Plants Love. And this one from Indie Critty, insightful, 2 exclamation points. I have been listening to this podcast since the very beginning and feel bad for never giving him the 5 stars he deserves. The quantity and quality of his guests is mind-blowing, very prolific. He is kind, intelligent, and pure of heart. Keep up the good work, Howie. We are listening and learning. Oh, my goodness. I don't even know what to say. Thank you so much. But I will say, imagine someone who doesn't know about plants and running and cold exposure and environmental action and everything else that we talk about coming across those reviews. It might get him to take a listen, and it might help us spread the message. So this is all by way of encouraging you, if you haven't yet left a review on iTunes, to please go and do so. And another great way to help the show is to become a patron by pledging a one-time amount or ongoing gift to the podcast. You can do that right at plantyourself.com. On the right sidebar, you'll see the links. In garden news, there's not much garden news. This is one of those weeks where just not much happens. And in running news, this is one of those periods where I'm working hard, but I'm not seeing a lot of progress. And I know these plateaus happen where I just sort of push and my times don't get any better, and it doesn't feel like my stride is improving or my gait. And this is one of those periods I have to just push through with awareness and faith that the work that I'm putting in now is going to pay off down the road. So that's all for this week. As always, be well, my friends. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song, Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Marrow, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Mr. Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jennifer Volkanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious, Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selby. Hi, Janet. Claire Adams, Tom Franzak, Jeanette Benham, Gil Lissert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesen, Ruth Ann Funderburg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious, Tracy Z, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Martha Bergner, Susan Ahmad, Nolly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Sharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch at Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Coble, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Holm Hedegaard, Izatu Zinwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Orlikoski of Plant Power for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen Jo Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justin Divich, Joshua Summermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iaconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Lehman, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bill Brielf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Trish Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagan, Tracy Gullidge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paran Ganshi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Olga Sidorowska, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Nayak, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, Michael Lushton, and Sarah Johnson for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.